Coming up.
Every generation of the royal family has to reinvent the role for the generation that they serve.
The role of a lifetime.
He's going to bring down to earth wisdom and connection.
That starts with heartbreak.
He could become king sooner than what he ever anticipated.
Those who know him best reveal how William
That's that what you see is what you get.
will wear the crown.
They're really going to do it their own way. They already are. That's not suddenly going to change with a crown on their heads.
Hello again and welcome to our 60 Minutes podcast, Extra Minutes. My name is Dimity, Clancy, and joining me again is my beautiful producer and my best friend,
Full
Natalie
disclosure.
Clancy. Yes, full disclosure. Well, it's a bit special today. We have some props, we have some beautiful mugs, and we have some treats.
I bought these mugs back for us a couple of years ago when we were in London for the coronation of Charles, King Charles, and never would have thought it would only be a couple of years before we're talking about the next coronation.
So it's a funny one, isn't it? Because you're like, oh, maybe we will, maybe we won't soon have one with Williams. We'll be buying
the
one with
fact that
Williams
we're even
face on
thinking about it, like I don't think anyone expected that the king would get sick so soon and that people would seriously start to think about who's next.
Yeah, and that's what we based this story on, was what sort of king will William make? What sort of king does he want to be? And if you missed it, you can catch up on our 60 Minutes YouTube channel. It really doesn't get better though, does it, Natty, than doing a story, shooting a royal story in London. It's pretty special.
It does not get better because as anyone who's been on holidays there, everywhere you turn is a reminder that it's a city based around the monarchy. You know, like all the streets have some royal reference.
It's all quite regal everywhere you turn, isn't it?
That's it. All the architecture, and even going there, it kind of reminds you that, you know, the royal family is so much more than sort of the glitz and the headlines. It's history too, and just the age of the buildings and the way that the city's set up for parades and all that kind of thing. You know, we walked some of those routes ourselves.
We did.
It is a special feeling to be there.
And also those, you know, the palaces, they're not just homes, but they're also workplaces. And that's where Jason Knopf worked for the royal family for 7 years.
That's right. Yeah, and I think we shot an interview outside Kensington Palace, which is where he was based for 7 years. And it's kind of funny to think, you know, you see all the tourists and visitors like us taking photos outside the gates and all of that. But there's hundreds of people who go to work there every day, and Buckingham Palace, and their offices in full swing. And you don't often think about that. They sort of look untouched and almost like museum-like. You'd never been to Windsor?
No,
And so
I hadn't.
take me through. I know you had a lot of fun. We all had a lot of fun that day.
I loved shooting this entire story, but I really loved Windsor, and I can't quite put my finger on it. And it was just a feeling. I really loved it. It was kind of out of the fuss and the bustling London, but it was its own little storybook, I guess, is how
That's
I
a
would have
perfect way of describing it.
would describe it.
Even the shops look like they're in a picture book.
Yeah,
like a
and the
child's
people
story.
were moving in a certain way. I don't know. It was like its own world.
Not that we spent too much time in the shops.
No, we didn't. It was just while the cameraman might have been getting some general shots of the
Actually,
village.
you're wearing those shoes today.
I am.
I think you are.
Yes.
We shot a piece to camera at Windsor Castle on the Great Walk
Yes.
out the back there. Out the back, like it's just out the backyard.
It was a
with the
slightly
Hills Hoist.
challenging piece to camera. Why was that, Natty?
It's because
Producer?
It's because Windsor is way too close for our liking to Heathrow, to the airport.
Yes.
So every time we'd start recording, you'd just hear a plane come overhead. So it was a test of patience. But
And not
we
to
were-
race the piece to camera because
That's
you
true.
don't want
You
to
don't
race
wanna beat
it,
the
but you want to
planes.
beat the plane.
It was tough, but there were worse places to be.
Absolutely. and challenges to have, huh?
Filming that piece to camera in that spot, it's where like so many of these iconic moments happen. Like with Prince Harry and Meghan's wedding, the car driving her up to St George's Chapel came up that road.
Yes.
And that Windsor Great Park was just packed with crowds.
Yeah.
The day we were there, it was so quiet, freezing cold, but still locals, you
Yeah.
know, going for their daily walk with their dog or that type of thing.
Yeah.
And you just kind of get a sense that even they're not sick of it. As in like they still get like a bit excited that they're walking up around the castle. Like it's got that energy to it, even on a dreary day. It's still a great place to be.
Absolutely.
It's not just Windsor Castle and Kensington Palace, the sort of big fancy royal properties that we got close to. We also went to Tetbury, which is about 2.5 hours drive from London. It's where
And it
Highgrove
was
is.
freezing cold.
It was so cold that day. Highgrove is the King's sort of private property.
Yes.
And when he was the Prince of Wales and William and Harry were teenagers, they spent a lot of time there.
Mm-hmm.
So in that area was another man who we interviewed, Grant Harold, who used to be the King's butler at Highgrove.
He was a lot of fun, wasn't he?
He was a lot of fun, and so was his
He was
partner.
up for a good time, yes, absolutely.
They had us
Jack.
in their home.
Yep.
And what was that day like for you?
It was wonderful. I didn't quite know what to expect, but I think one of the things that made this story really work is that everybody was a lot of fun and they were out to have fun.
And they also want to help.
Yes.
Like they want to talk about this.
Yes,
They're
absolutely.
super enthusiastic and they want to do a good job.
Yeah, and Grant was really open to, answering any questions that we had, giving his honest opinions about what we thought, especially around, William and his brother Harry
And he did
their
give us
relationship.
a hot tip now that we've got these pastries here. He said that at Highgrove, the most popular dessert
Yes.
was a chocolate biscuit cake.
Not that one, but yes.
Not this one. But I thought it sounded delicious.
And that was part of his everyday life.
Yeah.
Tea was part of everyday life, something he had to do in his job every single day and serve.
I'm not sure
to
he'd approve
Charles.
of our setup. We don't have any sauces.
No, and also drinking out of this mug and things like that. I'm not sure
You can't
that he
get
would.
better. It's got the King's face on it.
What do you think it was about it that people have been drawn to this story?
I think it was probably the people in it, especially Jason Knopf, who I think came off on camera how we found him to be throughout all of our dealings with him as just a genuine, fun guy who had some really good, authentic stories to tell. And I think he had a warmth that drew people in.
And I think also he's close to William. And I think a lot of the time when you read, listen or hear royal coverage, it's people not so close to the actual family. So I think I loved his stories. I loved the interview. We had a lot of fun speaking to Jason.
We could have kept going all afternoon,
We could have indeed. But he was very giving with his time. What I really liked about Jason Knopf's interview is that he enlightened us to all of those big moments that we see, all of those photos, those historic moments that, has the whole world watching. They're carefully choreographed moments. And Jason really took us behind the scenes. He had some great stories. Which one should we start with? Let's start with Princess Charlotte, because I think that was my favourite story in the interview. So he was the press secretary for William and Kate when Princess Charlotte was born. And he kind of described that day as an exciting day of celebration. There was one of the good moments, but so much planning.
And so much pressure.
Yes, had gone into that. And he said it was a difficult balance between, feeding the world the coverage that everyone's waiting to see, but also dealing with a heavily pregnant woman who's about to give birth.
You know what that's like?
I know exactly what those last few days are like, especially on the day. There's the anticipation of meeting your baby. It's a really special private time with your husband. You're not feeling great and you're not walking very straight, let's face it. But, it was Jason's job to kind of nurture that and let that natural, precious family moment happen. But you've got hundreds of cameras and reporters outside waiting for any little piece of information.
I feel like, too, you've got an interesting take on it because you know what it's like to be the mum, but you also know what it's like to be the reporter.
Absolutely.
Who's been outside that hospital for 4 or 5 days waiting for this story to break.
And I guess, we've come across a lot of Jason Knopfs in our time, press secs who you're dealing with who know that they're trying to look after the people that they're representing, but also, feed what we need to do our job. So... But the funny story with him, I just loved the way he told it. He was like one of the first to know, basically, that Princess Charlotte had been born, and he was given a piece of paper with the gender, the time of birth, and the weight of the baby. And at the same time was juggling hundreds of cameras outside. So he goes outside with this piece of paper. So he's standing among the press pack and drops the piece of paper and suddenly cannot find it. Says he never found it.
And spends the next 3 hours with his heart racing, thinking somebody is going to pick up the paper and break the story.
Can you imagine that
before
pressure,
the palace has
of
announced
just
it?
Looking around going,
The thing is, we can imagine it.
I know.
because we would be freaking out.
What would you do if you were a journalist standing outside the Lindo wing and you look down and see the piece of paper and it's got, hang on, the time, the date.
I know what I'd do.
Weight.
What would you do?
What would you do? Would you break it? Would you approach Jason? What would you do in that situation as a journalist?
You'd have to tell him, but
would you?
I think so. I actually loved, though, in his telling of that story, that he said in the frenzy of it all, he was going inside to greet the prince and princess and bring them out the front with the baby. And he was in the lift going up to meet them, and he's just saying to himself, remember to say congratulations. Like, remember that, yes, I've got a job to do, but they're also just a family who's welcomed a new baby.
Potentially I've just dropped the biggest piece of information the world's waiting for. But hang on, I have to say congratulations and treat them like normal people, a mum who's just had a baby.
And I feel like that's probably what a lot of his life was like, in trying to remember that there's a huge sort of bureaucracy around them and a whole lot of formalities that he has to nail.
Yes.
But at the same time going, they're human, I'm human.
Yes.
Let's not forget that moment. Another funny story actually that Jason told that I quite liked was he said when Prince George was starting nursery school in Norfolk, he had to go out and meet the staff and sort of have a chat with them about what to do if there's media interest or if cameras turn up. And he said he turned up and they had the meeting sitting on little plastic stools in the playground. And just the thought of, you know, that really official sort of top secret conversation happening in a preschool playground is quite funny.
But they're conversations that have to happen. And I guess
absolutely
that's where it's really tricky for his job, because he's really got to strike that balance. And we got that real sense that William and Kate really like to foster that, to protect those times, protect those moments, because they're family first.
And the other thing that I found quite endearing too is that he said often in Kensington Palace they'd look out the window and see George on a four-wheeler just going around the courtyard.
With William chasing after him. Yeah. And there was that fine line, he said, between looking out the window and going,
Close the curtain.
Let them just have their moment. Let them have their moment. So, yeah, it was some beautiful stories that we don't often get to hear. But then also I think too was interesting was about the serious moments, about having to actually carry that family through the hard times, you know, like William finding out his dad's got cancer, Kate's got cancer. They're difficult too.
Absolutely. And I think that's probably why why Jason described it as such a surreal job, because one moment you're having a huge celebration that the whole world it's like a party for the whole world, and then it can be the absolute opposite very quickly. So I think that would be a really tough balance to strike.
What an interesting gig, huh?
Yeah.
Another thing I was enlightened to was those who cover the royals. It's their beat. Tell me about that.
Oh, look, I'm not one of them, so I'm probably not the best person to tell you.
But you've dealt as a producer, you've produced quite a lot of the royal coverage for 60 Minutes.
I love it.
I know you do. What is it like to deal in that world?
I think it's fun. It can also be stressful because often everyone wants the same story. It's tricky for us as a long-form program that airs once on a Sunday night to find a way to tell the story that's different to what the rest of the world's media is doing. I think that's the fun part, and that's the exciting part of working here, that you've got to do something that's different. You can't just do what everyone else is doing. And often the difference is the people you talk to. And I think we got that with this story by talking to Jason.
Yep.
But obviously in telling these royal stories, not just this one, all of them, we also, as you say, have a lot of interactions with royal reporters whose full-time gig is covering the royals. People like Valentine Lowe. We had Roya Nicker in this story, who's the royal editor at the Times, and their knowledge, just their general knowledge of the royal family, always impresses me.
Yes.
But it's also, I guess, like any news round, you were a crime reporter for a long time. It's competitive among them. You want to be the one to break a story. You want to have the best sources in the palace to get the best news first. Often these reporters are, quite rightly, really keen to talk about the stories they've broken, but they can be
not what somebody else broke.
They can be a bit reserved when it comes to stories someone else broke. And I can understand that, because I think we'd probably be the same.
The other thing about covering a royal story, like one of those big events like a coronation.
A coronation?
A coronation, cheers. What is it like to get a spot among those crowds? You know, like it's a real
this
thing
story.
to find.
I know where you're leading me. This is a trap.
It's a real to find a spot among those crowds. What lengths do you have to go to?
When we covered the coronation, I was with Tom Steinford, who covered many a royal story, including, I think he was the 9 reporter there when Princess Charlotte was born.
Right.
So we'll have to tell Tom all he had to do was stop looking at the doors of the hospital
and look down on the ground,
and he would have got the scoop.
Find the scoop, exactly.
But on the day of the coronation, it was raining. It was absolutely packed. We had accreditation to access the general public areas, but we didn't have access to like a media riser, like essentially a stage that's set up as a position. Our one task for the day was to get a piece to camera, which is where Tom is just speaking directly down the barrel as the King's carriage was passing. So we just had to get a spot where we would see the carriage in the background. We ended up deciding on this spot near Big Ben, but when we set up the shot, we just weren't high enough. There was so many people, you couldn't see enough behind him. So we got ourselves on the tube. We ended up going a few stops away. Tom and I walked to a hardware store where we picked up a ladder and some buckets. It's in the rain.
Gold.
It's in the rain, and we're walking through London, which is absolutely heaving because everyone wants to be at the coronation. Tom's got a ladder on his shoulder. I've got 2 buckets. We find our camera crew sitting in the gutter, as we so often do,
I know.
outside. I think
unusual.
it was Green Park tube station, and we're about to get back on to go back to Westminster on the tube. They've shut the station down, but they'd shut the station because of overcrowding. We get in a black cab, just hail one off the street, pack all of our gear in, end up getting dropped to another tube station where we know the next stop is Westminster. We managed to get on the tube, but what happens when we get to Westminster? Straight past. It doesn't stop because it's too busy. So we end up getting off the tube on the other side of the river near Waterloo in the pouring rain, walking with the buckets, the ladder and the gear through like a mosh pit across that bridge near Big Ben to get back to that spot. We got it. We got the shot. We used the ladder and the buckets, but
So that's what Tom's standing on.
That's what Tom's standing on.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is what you do to get the shot.
And royal stories aren't always as glamorous as they might seem.
No, they are definitely not. Making television is not.
No.
One of the things about this story, though, is that gets me is in order for William to become king, he's got to lose his dad. And that's a kind of a really heartbreaking element to this whole process, to the whole fuss, to the whole ceremony, all of that.
I think it's often overlooked.
It is overlooked. And I think people
caught
forget
up in the excitement.
That, you know, and watching, when we're putting it together, we're watching some vision of them practicing, the family practicing for Charles's coronation. And they were sharing these like beautiful father and son moments. And then you stop for a second and you think, hang on a sec, when William's doing this, Charles won't be there.
And it's probably the one moment when you'd want him there
Absolutely.
the most.
It's the biggest moment of your life. It's something you've worked for your whole life. And his mum won't be there, you know. Both parents will be gone by that stage. And I don't know, it was just something that kept coming back to me as we were putting this story together, is that in order for all of, you know, this fuss that we all talk about and the anticipation of William becoming king, is that Charles has to die first.
And that's kind of one of those reminders that at the end of the day, they are still a family.
Yes.
And he's still going to be a son who's taking on one of the biggest jobs in the world without his dad.
Yeah, it's a really interesting balance, like two sides to the family, I think. But of course, until then, the royal coverage will continue. There's a real appetite.
By all accounts, the King's program is filling up a bit more this year as well. He's got a trip to Italy coming up.
Yeah.
So who knows how long it will be until we have another coronation.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Natty, cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers to the next one. Thank you. And if you would like to catch the full story, you can turn to the 60 Minutes channel on YouTube and also 9 Now. Thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next time.